Order. Ruth Jones to move the motion.
Thank you, Ms Butler, and I beg to move that this House has considered the persecution of Christians worldwide. And I thank the Backbench Business Committee for selecting this important motion for debate this morning. I must begin by declaring an interest as an officer of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for International Freedom of Religion or Belief. Across the world, many obscene, difficult and heartbreaking things are happening to people because of their beliefs. Our APPG aims to speak for those of all faiths and none, and to act as a constructive voice in this place to address religious persecution globally, both now and in the future. This is a subject close to my heart. In 2023, I was very pleased to represent the APPG at the IRF Summit in Taiwan, where we heard harrowing reports of persecution, torture and killings on account of people's religious beliefs. And I pay tribute to the unwavering strength of those killed, removed from their homes, refused jobs and imprisoned without recourse solely for their faith. Amidst the increasing instances of persecution, hate crimes and stereotyping, numerous organisations work tirelessly to expose and combat these injustices. And I'm grateful for their collective efforts, particularly the hours of research that go into producing reports so that we can be made aware in this House of the suffering caused by anti-religious movements, religious extremism, political oppression and government overreach. By gathering data, providing legal support and amplifying the voices of the persecuted, these organisations expose violations to the International Declaration of Human Rights and offer hope to those who've been silenced. Their work is instrumental in ensuring that freedom of religion or belief becomes a better recognised and protected human right. Without their vigilance, many cases of abuse would remain hidden, and individuals which have been aided by their efforts would continue to suffer without recourse. Despite the very real threat of persecution, hundreds of millions of Christians, effectively entire populations, remain steadfast in their faith at great personal cost. They willingly risk their livelihoods, their families and even their lives to uphold their beliefs. Their resilience in the face of oppression is testament to their unwavering conviction, and their strength should not go unnoticed. It is imperative that we advocate on their behalf, ensuring they receive the fundamental freedoms that so many of us take for granted in democratic societies. To ignore their plight is to turn our backs on the very principles of justice and human dignity that underpin free nations. Despite being the world's largest religion, Christianity is the most persecuted minority faith in many regions. This persecution stems from a range of sources, including Islamist extremism, Marxist regimes and dictatorial governments. In some countries, public celebrations of Christmas are not only discouraged, but are actually life-threatening. Open Doors, an organisation monitoring Christian persecution worldwide, reported alarming global figures for 2024. I will, of course.
My honourable friend's making an excellent speech, and she mentioned Christmas. Was it not one of the most heartbreaking things all of us in this House have seen, that Christmas was cancelled in the place of Jesus' birthplace this year? And we've seen in Palestine the persecution, in Gaza, some of the most sacred sites in Christianity, the third oldest church, reduced to rubble. At times, it's heartbreaking. Would you not agree with me that it's not just, in her list of things, Marxism, Islamism, the situation in Palestine should draw our attention to Christians persecuted there too?
Absolutely, and I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and she's absolutely right. You can't worship in rubble. It's important that we acknowledge all the areas, and I will come on to that in my speech shortly. Because we know about Open Doors and their alarming global figures for 2024, and they were presented to us here in Parliament in January this year. The World Watch List and the accompanying report paint a deeply concerning picture. Last year, almost 5,000 believers worldwide were killed for their faith. Most were from Nigeria. However, other countries in sub-Saharan Africa have seen rising numbers of Christian deaths, including Burkina Faso, where 201 believers lost their lives. That's more than a five-fold increase on 2023. The last year has seen almost 210,000 Christians forced from their homes to go into hiding or exile because of their faith, almost half of whom are from Nigeria. And that's despite around half of all Nigerians being Christians. Since the first World Watch List in 1983, North Korea has been number 1 23 times. That's almost 70% of the time. The persecution of North Korean Christians has worsened in the last year following a rise in reported incidents of violence, and it coincides with stricter regulations announced by the North Korean authorities early in 2024. More and more Christians are having to worship undercover. In Afghanistan, it is effectively impossible to publicly express your faith there. In Algeria, all Protestant churches have been forced to close, and the number of Christians awaiting trial and sentencing is at an all-time high. In China, the era of relative tolerance is over. Unregistered churches are now illegal. Church teaching is informed by ideological pressure and official indoctrination. Religious education for children is banned. Many congregations are taking their fellowships underground into isolated home groups. Meanwhile, the small Christian community in Libya is extremely careful to avoid a repeat of the March 2023 crackdown that swept up numerous Christians for arrest. Believers are increasingly having to be creative and courageous in how they gather, if at all. Open Doors state that the persecuted church is increasingly a displaced church, exiled to refugee or internally displaced people camps, IDPs. Sudan is facing the largest displacement crisis in the world. In a country of 49 million people, the number of IDPs by mid-2024 had surpassed 7.7 million. In Nigeria, radicalised Islamic Fulani militants continue to drive Christian communities from their lands. Conflict in the Manipur region in India forced tens of thousands of Christians to flee for their lives, often with little more than the clothes on their back. For already vulnerable Christians, the loss of home and community makes them even more of an easy target. I will, of course.
I thank the honourable member for giving way and congratulate her on securing the debate. On her excellent speech where she's outlining the outstanding work of Open Doors and other organisations like that, would you agree with me that what we need to try and see, as well as coordinating a UK-wide attempt to try and address the problems that are ongoing, that we also need to internationalise it to try and get peoples of a range of nations to be aware of this problem and trying to resolve it?
Absolutely, and I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention there. I mean, Open Doors is a great organisation for highlighting what's going on across the world, but he is right. We do need a concerted effort across the world to stamp out this persecution of all faiths, but in particular we're talking about Christians today, so I thank him for that. In Pakistan, young Christian men are increasingly being targeted for forced conversion, with recent violent attacks, including a Christian youth whose throat was slit after a blasphemy accusation. In Iran, 139 Christians were arrested in 2024, with many sentenced to lengthy prison terms under national security laws simply for attending house churches. In Nicaragua and Colombia, church leaders face arbitrary imprisonment and assassination for standing up to authoritarianism and criminal groups. Mexico is number 31 on the 2025 World Watch List, the highest it's been since 2005, and the only country in Latin America to rise in the rankings. Organised crime is rampant in many areas, and churches and believers who seek to counter it make themselves targets. There has been an increase in the number of believers killed and abducted there. From violent attacks to house arrest and forced marriages around the world, Christian women and girls are shamed and persecuted twice, once for their faith and the second time for their gender. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the most translated document in the world. It has been signed by all 193 UN member states. Crucially, it covers the provisions for the freedom to change one's religion or belief, to adopt a religion or belief of choice, or to retain one's current beliefs. But despite the numerous protections outlined there, there is a lack of accountability for those who do not uphold these principles, leaving religious minorities vulnerable to continued persecution. Over the past 24 months, 200 written parliamentary questions have been answered by the FCDO, with mention of the protection and aid of persecuted Christians. Some steps which are being taken by the UK to protect this fundamental right include advocating political transition that leads to an inclusive, non-sectarian and representative government, reminding all parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law, and ensuring official development assistance, ODA, is allocated to those who are most vulnerable and most in need of this assistance, irrespective of race, religion or ethnicity. However, it is vital to consider what measurements will be used to assess the impact of such aid, projects and policy. The government must continue its work on this issue, and there are areas in which it can go further. And these include ensuring that UK diplomats are raising cases of Christian persecution at bilateral and multilateral levels, including urging governments of concern to cease the repression of religious minorities and comply with international human rights standards. It also includes advocating for the establishment or strengthening of UN mechanisms to investigate FORB violations, and including expanding UK aid and development funding to support local peace-building efforts, trauma recovery programmes and economic rehabilitation for survivors of religious violence in Nicaragua and Colombia. Targeting sanctions under the UK's global human rights... Of course I will.
I thank her for giving me, and I apologise for interrupting. She mentions ODA funding, ever decreasing ODA funding, but does she believe complete intolerance to religious persecution should be a prerequisite for ODA funding?
Yes, I thank the honourable gentleman for that, and I do agree with him. And I'm glad the Minister is here today to listen to the debate, and I'm very interested in his comments that will come at the end. So thank you for that. Targeting sanctions under the UK's global human rights sanctions regime against individuals and entities complicit in the Christian persecution is important too. Also, I would ask the government to make sure that they are publicly naming and supporting at-risk and imprisoned Christian leaders, using diplomatic channels and public platforms to press for their immediate and unconditional release. Integrating FORB into broader UK human rights and foreign policy frameworks, ensuring the new integrated human rights and sanctions regime prioritises religious freedom alongside other human rights. And finally, recognising the gender and religion-specific vulnerabilities when designing strategies to tackle protection, displacement, conflict prevention, peace-building, development and human rights generally. In recent years, the UK has shown great leadership in promoting FORB, but it is vital this continues to do so. When the freedom of religion or belief is under attack, other basic human rights are often under threat as well. FORB serves as the ultimate litmus test for the health of other freedoms within a country. We are blessed to live in a society in which the government does not take these threats lightly. However, the growing issue of rising authoritarianism in North Korea, Central Asia and Iran, as well as extreme displacement in West and Sub-Saharan Africa, remains deeply concerning and underrepresented. I look forward to hearing from colleagues present here this morning, and I hope the Minister will address our concerns in his response, so the freedom of religion or belief remains a leading priority in foreign policy and diplomatic engagement. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. We estimate around 4 or 5 minutes per speech. The question is that this House has considered the persecution of Christians. Desmond Sway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nigeria is number 7 in the World Watch list published by Open Doors, and some of the most egregious examples of persecution, with whole communities being laid waste, come from Plateau State. And many commentators have put, including the EU Parliament, have put this down to the pressures brought about by climate change. Well, Madam Chair, climate change does not rape people. Climate change doesn't bomb church services. Climate change does not abduct women and children and force them into marriages. These things are conducted by an extremist ideology, entirely unrestrained by proper state power through its incompetence, indifference, or even its complicity. Can I ask the Minister what assistance the United Kingdom is affording to Nigeria in implementing the Human Rights Council's Universal Periodic Review in respect of Recommendation 2 for the protection of freedom of religion and belief? And has he shared my own experience as a minister of visiting some of the countries where these things take place and having my ear bent as to what we should do about it by both members of the opposition and members of the government, as if we were still the colonial power able to do these things. So I ask the Minister, what leverage do we actually have beyond the important role of providing a platform to share these views, to reassure the sufferers that we are alive to their concerns, that we're praying for them at least? And what leverage do we actually have in these situations as a government? And finally, can I just have a word of caution on the intervention that was made on overseas official development relief? Properly spent, that is directed to projects to relieve communities that are suffering. If it's used as a political weapon to put leverage on governments and withdrawn, you only make the sufferers suffer even more. Thank you.
Thank you. Juliet Campbell.
And it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. I thank my honourable friend from Newport and Eswyn for bringing this issue to the House, and I appreciate her advocacy for those who are going through persecution because of their Christian belief. Nobody deserves to be persecuted because of their faith. Freedom to practice religion, experience communion with family and friends, and worship without fear of violence are fundamental to human rights conventions. Christians around the world are being denied these protections and are experiencing unimaginable heartache and suffering. Currently, it is estimated that there are 380 million Christians around the world who are subjected to high levels of persecution and discrimination. The data is clear and it is incredibly troubling. And there has been a rise in the violence towards Christians across the globe over many, many years. Persecution often involves a broad scope of behaviour. However, it's usually the bloody and the violent extremes of persecution that get media attention. But this attention is often short-lived. Disinformation, marginalisation and intimidation come under the informal definition of persecution, and it deserves our attention. We have an obligation to speak up on the issue and speak up for those who are suffering, those who endure torture and killings, and those numbers are rising. I am keen to understand the steps that are being taken to better support persecuted Christians across the world and to promote religious freedom and beliefs, and whether there are plans in place to implement any calls to action from organisations like Open Doors UK. I congratulate my honourable friend for bringing this very important issue.
Thank you. Jim Shannon.
First of all, can I say it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I understand the first time, the first of many, I'm sure. Can I commend the Honourable Lady from Newport West and Islin, I think it is. I probably got that all wrong, but apologies for that. And commend the Honourable Lady, a dear friend, but also an officer in the APPG for freedom of religious belief. I declare that interest, first of all, Madam Chair. And I want to express thanks to all of the honourable members who have persistently championed the cause of religious freedom, particularly by persecuted Christians globally. Their unwavering commitment ensures that this critical issue remains at the forefront of our parliamentary discourse. It's imperative to recognise the alarming escalation in the persecution of Christians worldwide. So I take the following statistics from a 2023 report published by the Aid to the Church in Need, who have thoughtfully considered the status of this fundamentally human rights for all religious traditions. So I'm going to speak about one country. I'm going to speak about Syria. There used to be 1.5 million Christians who called Syria their home before the war, which started in 2011. Today that number has plummeted to 300,000, or an 80% decline in a little over a decade. In Aleppo, the Christian population has dropped from 250,000 to just 30,000, from 12% of the city's population to a mere 1.4%. In Raqqa, where once there was 11,000 Christians, barely 100 remain today. In Deir el-Zor, once a home to 5,000 Christians, the number has fallen to nearly zero. So that tells you all about Syria, about the decline in Christians and those who have a faith and a belief. Sadly, we see once more this outcome where religious persecution is ignored, and Syria is not alone. Nigeria now has approximately 3.3 million internally displaced completely by religiously motivated violence. communities upgraded, entire cultures erased. I'm heartened to be part and to support a government and a minister that has made significant strides in delivering on the recommendations set forth in the Bishop of Truro report, in particular recommendation 2, which calls for the UK to be the global leader in championing freedom of religion or belief, ensuring it's given due priority in the UK's engagement with multilateral institutions. The UK Government has addressed nearly 80 written questions on behalf of religious minorities in this year. I extend my sincere thanks to all those who have utilised their voices to highlight this freedom. It serves as a litmus test for human rights. The liberty to believe in a higher power, to worship and to stand in awe is intrinsic to our humanity. The values imparted by Christianity make the humanitarian efforts of Christian organisations indispensable to the world. Take, for example, one such global Christian church operating in 192 countries and territories. They've clocked up 6.6 million hours of volunteer work. Christian teachings are not only globally relevant, but also hold profound significance here in the United Kingdom and indeed across this world. The Bible warns that turning away from God leads to moral decay, manifesting in behaviours such as wickedness, greed and a lack of compassion. Conversely, embracing Christian teachings offers a pathway to healing and restoration within our communities. The Apostle Peter says, above all, love each other deeply because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. That's 1 Peter 4, verses 8 to 10. This is a mindset that builds strong, stable and peaceful societies. Countries that champion freedom of religion or belief lay the foundation for lasting peace. And to those steadfast souls who, in the face of relentless persecution, continue their journey with unwavering faith, I echo the words of Christ. In this world you will trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. John 16, verse 33. And finally, I recognise, and this is the last words, Madam Chair, I recognise the significance of this year, 2025. Let it be a jubilee year, not just in name, but in action. A year where the captives of persecution find justice, where those in fear find protection, and where nations find peace through the promotion of tolerance and interfaith dialogue. That's the sort of country I want. That's the world I want. I'm sure everybody here has the same notion. Thank you.
Thank you. David Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for Newport West and Isling for securing this debate, and also to declare an interest as the recently appointed UK Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. In the 3 months that I've been in that role, Madam Chair, it's become evident to me that the sad truth is that the scale of religious persecution is growing in the world. In 2019, the Truro report, which was the report which gave rise to the role that I'm honoured to now inhabit, commented that Christianity, I quote, Christianity now faces the possibility of being wiped out in parts of the Middle East. Christians are suffering from external threats almost everywhere. But here's a story of persecution familiar to many in this room. They paraded an effigy of a religious leader through the streets, chalked hysterical graffiti on the walls and wrote books criticising them as fifth columnists and traitors. They were suspected, mistreated and had only recently been given the freedom to run for public office. Madam Chair, that's not Pakistan or Nigeria, but London in the 1850s, in a frenzy about newly emancipated Catholics. It's a crucial part of this debate to acknowledge that our country's credibility on freedom of religion or belief is not because we are holier than thou, but because we've got it wrong in the past. Our mistakes as a country in religious toleration and the learning we take from that is the basis on which we as a country can condemn the horror being inflicted upon Christians around the world. I'm proud to be the MP for North Northumberland, home to Holy Island, which witnessed some of the earliest and most sustained attacks on British Christians in the Viking raids. But over the centuries, Northumberland has come to believe deeply in freedom, tolerance and the right for everybody to believe and confess how they wish. But today, in parts of the world like Nigeria, parts of that country are becoming playgrounds for jihadists who are freewheeling through the region. I'm reminded of the story of Bishop Wilfrid, whom I met last month. On Christmas Day last year, 47 Christians in Wilfrid's diocese were killed in militant attacks, with another 6,800 believers displaced. We've already heard from around the Middle East. And in the Middle East, the ancient home of 3 of the world's global religions, Christian communities are in freefall. In Iraq in 2014, there were almost 1 million Christians. Today, there are only 200,000. The point is clear. Despite the global growth of the Church, Christians remain vulnerable to persecution and conflict. On that point? Absolutely, yeah.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member for giving me, and I congratulate him on his appointment as the Envoy for Freedom of Religion and Belief. I wish it hadn't taken the government 6 months to appoint him, but I'm sure that he will approach this role now with the alacrity that it demands. He talks about the attrition to global Christianity and the oppression that Christian faiths around the world are sustaining. Does he believe that in the discourse that we engage in these parliaments in the West and in societies where religion is tolerated, does he believe that we need to accept that there is no sort of league table of religious persecution? Because I'm concerned sometimes that Christianity is at the bottom of that league table, that there is a view that religious persecution is wrong, but some of it is more wrong than others, and Christianity and persecution of Christians often comes out at the wrong end of that equation. Does he agree that we need to be crystal clear with the regimes that are persecuting Christians, that we believe that this is absolutely anathema to what should be done by any government?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention and for his warm welcome. I agree that any human right violation is a human right violation, and it should not matter what religion or belief that you have. We should treat it in the same way. And I'll actually come on to the broader connection between rights just now, because there's no country in the world that's a perfectly free society on the one hand, but just happens to persecute Christians on the other. This makes Christian persecution and freedom of religion or belief more generally an acid test that reveals the true colours of many regimes that would rather portray themselves as orderly and harmless. You see, not being allowed to gather for worship means there is no freedom of peaceful assembly. Not being allowed to evangelise or convert means that there is no freedom of conscience, speech or expression. Being imprisoned for your faith means there is no right to liberty. Without these freedoms, there is no democracy. So when Christians are thrown in prison, they're likely to share cells with Alawites, Uyghurs and Ahmadiyas and other individuals who are not tolerated because of what they do or don't believe. And as our heart breaks for Christians who are imprisoned, so our heart also breaks for the many others who are abandoned because of what they believe. Forb is often seen as a canary in the coal mine for freedoms, but this analogy is imperfect because it suggests the canary doesn't matter. A better description for Forb is as the lone night watchman found bleeding and unconscious outside as the night grows darker and freedom slips away. This suffering, Madam Chair, can overwhelm us, but my hope is that the United Kingdom is uniquely well placed to act. Our country has been on a long journey from persecution to pluralism that gives us a legitimacy with which we can challenge and encourage other nations to do better. We believe something radical, which is that while religious freedom is certainly good for those being persecuted, it would also bless those doing the persecuting by unlocking new opportunities and freedoms for their nations to flourish. I'm encouraged that the Foreign Office is serious about keeping human rights as a cornerstone of our foreign policy, and I commit to playing my part as the Special Envoy, pressing the government as we seek to navigate this new world. So in conclusion, Madam Chair, in North Northumberland, my constituency, we share the same common sense values: freedom of speech, fair play and respect for your fellow man. Those values were hard won over centuries of debate and sometimes conflict. We now have the opportunity to lead the world in avoiding the mistakes we made and end the persecution of Christians wherever we see it. And where we see Christian persecution, we know that there will be those of other faiths and beliefs suffering too. It's my expectation that this government will step bravely into the breach to defend them, so that, in the words of Jesus, quoting the prophet Isaiah, we can proclaim good news to the poor, freedom for the captives, recovery of sight for the blind, and to set the oppressed free.
Yeah. Danny Kruger.
Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under you, and it's a pleasure to be in the chamber with so many of my favourite colleagues, and I look around and I genuinely am so inspired and pleased, gratified to be among this group of parliamentarians of all parties. I don't know what it is that binds us together, well I do, but we're mostly believers. But I really do pay tribute to everybody here, particularly to the honourable gentleman, and my congratulations to him on his very significant appointment. I very much welcome his role, and to my honourable friend opposite for her championing of this agenda over many years and for calling this debate. I think it is necessary to acknowledge at the outset, and I hope in slight contradiction to the honourable gentleman opposite, that this won't be taken as too sort of Christo-chauvinist a perspective, a sort of Christian supremacist principle. But I do actually genuinely believe that the liberties that we are here to defend on behalf of all religions, as the honourable gentleman says, absolutely, of all belief systems around the world, The reason we do that in this country is because we have a Christian foundation to our politics. And the source of all our liberties, the source of the principle of political liberty that this country has sporadically and with some success and some failures helped to export around the world, derive fundamentally from the Christian foundations of our political institutions and our political philosophy. And what we think of as the intrinsic value of every human being, where does that come from? It only comes from one place, which is the Bible. And all of our laws and what we now call human rights have this origin. And indeed, the very concept of the secular space in which you're free to believe anything or nothing derives ultimately from the Christian principle that everybody has value and that it's not right to pry into other men's or women's souls. So I don't agree with the honourable gentleman that we derive our legitimacy to speak into the space because of our past sins as a country or as a civilization. I recognise those. But actually I think we are speaking into this area on this topic because we are the heirs of a tradition which recognises fundamentally the value of Christianity. And to his understandable regional patriotism about Northumberland and think of St Cuthbert and the great saints of those days, I bring him King Alfred, who defended Wessex, Wiltshire, against the Vikings and pushed back the tide of paganism, restored Christianity to England, and ultimately helped to export Christianity to the world. So actually being proud of the Christian basis of our politics in this country, I think, is appropriate to this debate. Happy to give way.
Quite quickly, and I'm not taking others' time, but the issue of human rights and persecution are two things that you can't divorce. If there's persecution, then there's human rights abuse. If there's human rights abuse, there's persecution. And does he agree that that's also the central figure and central focus for us as Christians, that we stand up for everybody, those with religious faith, those with no faith, and those with different faiths?
Absolutely, I absolutely agree. And of course, it's not just Christians who think this, but I do think in our country, and it's right that we do proudly stand on this ground, that we defend the rights of everybody to absolute freedom of belief. And as I say, I think we do that because ultimately our foundation of our politics is Christian. Let me just refer quickly to the Holy Land, as honourable members have done. And I've become chair of the APPG for Christians in the Holy Land, at the instigation of our former colleague David Linden, sad loss to the House on this topic, at least, not on others. But he encouraged me to take up this role, and so I've been having a number of very, very powerful and moving conversations with Palestinian Christians about the state of the church in the Holy Land. And in fact, I visited many years ago during the Second Intifada in the early 2000s with Canon Andrew White, who was the Church of England's representative to the Holy Land in those days, and a very great man. And we saw how we visited Bethlehem, and I saw how absolutely desperate the plight of the church was at that time. And it is true to say that, and as the honourable lady who's now left acknowledged, that it has got worse, and the state of the church in the Holy Land is very, very dire now. And I just acknowledge the fact that that is the consequence of Israeli government activity, and I recognise that. And as a strong supporter of Israel, I recognise how hard it is for Christians in the West Bank to worship. I also, on that trip, visited, or not, around that time, a different trip, visited with Andrew White Iraq just after the invasion, and at that point we could wander around quite freely, and there was a sense that there was going to see a new flourishing of religious freedom in Iraq. And we visited St George's Cathedral in Baghdad, and there was a service. It was reopened after the war, and it was a wonderful moment of Iraqi Christians as well as lots of American and British soldiers present as well, and it felt like a dawning of something wonderful in Iraq. Of course, within months that church was closed. Many of the Christians that we'd met were dead, and the tragedy of the American-led invasion was that Christianity in Iraq has been severely oppressed ever since. And of course, we know about the similar phenomena in Syria and elsewhere since. So the tragedy of nation building, often led by Christians, in the Middle East has not been been good for the Church. But the principal enemy of Christianity globally, Madam Chair, is not misapplied Western liberalism. It is alternative religions and ideologies, particularly Marxism in China, radical Hinduism in India, and of course Islam, radical Islam all over the world. And honourable members have mentioned that my right honourable friend has mentioned Nigeria, an absolutely appalling situation there. 3,000 people killed a year in recent years, getting on for 250,000 people displaced. I think that's around half the total global numbers for those statistics of killed and displaced in Nigeria. In Algeria, as the Honourable Lady mentioned, I think I want to call particular attention to the Kabila people, a Berber community in the north of the country who have been resisting the Islamist ideology of the Algerian government for many years and have suffered severe persecution. And they are attempting self-determination. And their slogan is, "In the name of all beliefs." And I want to acknowledge that, going back to my original point, that when we defend Christianity, we are defending everybody. And I want to pay tribute to that campaign. I want to finish by just asserting this point. Christianity is established in the West, and therefore we think of it as the sort of dominant philosophy, even though in many ways in our country I don't feel it is anymore. But it is the shield of minorities everywhere, and I think we need a stronger promotion of the value of Christianity in every society. And we should not simply be defensive in debates like this about defending the status quo, defending Christians. We actually should be, supporting those who promote Christianity, sympathetically, of course, and always peacefully. But the promotion of Christianity is a moral good, because wherever Christianity is, life is better. And I pay tribute to the honourable gentleman. I couldn't put it better than he did, in our absolute sense that Christianity is good for people. So to finish with, I want to pay tribute to Fiona Bruce, the honourable gentleman's predecessor, great friend of many of us, and a pioneer in this space in the last Parliament and over many years for her work promoting religious freedom and belief in this country and around the world. And I think it's a great shame that the bill that she was championing fell before the last election. I don't know if the honourable gentleman would have welcomed that, but I don't know if the government has any intention of reviving the measures that were proposed in that bill, which were to establish the position of the envoy on a statutory footing, properly resourced, rather than something that, as it were, exists at the whim of the government. So I regret that fell, but I do pay tribute to her, and I pay tribute particularly to the honourable gentleman. I think it's a tremendous thing that he is now in post, and he has a great and important role to do. And absolutely lastly, just to end on a note of hope, there are great things happening in the world. And Christianity is not oppressed, not downtrodden, not downcast. We are actually seeing very, very positive signs of growth and revival in China. The house church movement has won many millions of converts. And here in the UK, Madam Chair, I'm encouraged. There's a report from the Bible Society and Theos recently called Quiet Revival, which demonstrates that actually quietly we are seeing new growth of our faith here in the UK, and on that basis I have confidence in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to get everybody in on this important debate, and we're looking to get to the Minister around 10:28. So around 4 minutes, please, per speech. I call Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Ms. Butler. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair. And as we prepare ourselves for Easter, it's right that we turn our eyes to those persecuted for following Christ around the world. And for that, I pay tribute to my honourable friend from Newport West and Islwyn. It's been poignant and humbling to listen to the speeches by members today, as it is sobering and challenging to read the reports of those that share the same faith as I, but whose experiences are so different. Today, there are around a third of the population, and growing, who share the Christian faith in the far reaches of this world, but for many their experiences are so different. And as we ruminate over the census of decline here in the UK, we see persecution of Christians around the world, and the sharp intolerance and violence that often their faith draws. The Open Doors watch list, Aid to the Church in Need, overseas development organisations and charities, amongst many, expose the deep scale of what the persecution on the basis of faith. Most conflicts and associated wars, war crimes, are also associated. And we know that around 380 million Christians across our planet are killed because of their faith or experience high levels of persecution. We see suppression, imprisonment, and the destruction of churches. But if not sexual or physical violence in the West, it can often show itself as psychological, spiritual suppression for all too few who dare speak the name of Jesus freely, even in a place like the UK, where there are no bounds, but even people dare not speak. There are three particular policy areas that I just quickly want to touch on. One is for the Home Office and ensuring that we have got safe and legal routes for people to come to the UK who experience persecution. We talk about them, but the reality is so different. And representing a human rights city, that is so vital. Second, for the Foreign Office, ODA has an incredible impact on ensuring more security, greater resilience, and is so important that we do return to 0.7%. And in a world where our global economy is so disrupted at the time, we must find space to restore to 0.7. And then on trade, I just think about China, as I always have, 15th on the World Watch List, and we've just signed a trade agreement. How much emphasis was there put on the need for freedom of religion and belief in China with the ink that marked that page of that agreement? We think, of course, of the suppression of the church there, its leaders, and so publicly denying Jimmy Lai the sacraments. It is so important that we review our policy. We said when we left the EU that we'd put human rights at the heart of our trade agreements, and we have work to do to secure that. This week I was listening to a sermon ahead of Easter. It reminded me of persecuted Christians around the world. It talked about coming to the end of the road where there is no hope. As the Israelites came to the Red Sea and the disciples came to the cross, it marked so much as the end. In a nation and world in chaos and crisis, it is hard to find hope. For many persecuted Christians imprisoned and tortured or living in fear, it is hard to find hope. There is such little hope in politics, on our streets or across the world. And yet the sermon went on to say, and then there was Jesus. That spins logic, everything on its head. The Red Sea opened, there was Resurrection Sunday, and for all of us who put our hope and trust in Christ, we know that there is eternal hope. It is with this that we see the most incredible witness of those who are persecuted, that their hope, and unfathomably their joy, reminds us all that no regime can suppress that cast-iron security that the Easter message brings. Such hope could not hold Jesus in a grave, enable persecuted Christians and us all, that no matter what we face, we know that Jesus is always with us and always will, as we invest in him, invest in us. We have such certainty that the hope in this broken world and for those that are persecuted will never be destroyed and can only be found in him.
Yeah. Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr Butler. It's an absolute honour to serve under your guidance this morning and pay particular tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Newport West and Isloin, for starting the debate so very well. Look, I think to be a Liberal is to stand up for the rights of people you don't like and don't agree with. Easy to stand up for the minorities you agree with. But on this occasion, I speak as somebody who I guess belongs to the minority on planet Earth, and indeed, if you believe the last census in the United Kingdom, who is a Christian. And I want to, as other people have said, I'll try and race through my remarks so others can get their fair share. I want to pay tribute to the World Watch List, to Open Doors, and for the work they've done in exposing persecution around the world. And I'll just pick on one or two instances, in particular, the state of Libya. Libya is very important for so many reasons. It is the fourth most persecuted place to be a Christian on planet Earth. Only 0.5%, 35,000 of the people in Libya are Christians. If you are a woman even suspected of being interested in Christianity, you will face horrific abuse, sexual violence, house arrest, forced marriage, even honour killing, so to speak. Men and women not spared. They are subject to losing their jobs, their homes, homes, their livelihoods, and there are not isolated incidents, there are widespread incidents of attacks upon Christians and suspected Christians right across that country, and the total instability in that country makes things even worse. I highlight Libya because that is the country through which so many refugees who may end up in this country go through. And when we talk about the Channel crossings, let's just put in perspective, whatever dangers, and they are huge dangers, people put themselves through to cross the Channel, it is absolutely nothing compared to the hideous danger that people go through to cross Libya in order to get themselves to the Mediterranean in the first place. Many of them from Eritrea, and Eritrea, a country where 44% of the population are Christians, and where young men and women find themselves forcibly conscripted indefinitely, very often to kill their own people. So we need to be aware of that when we're talking about the refugee crisis. But it's not just failing states where there is a threat to Christians. We'll see Christian nationalism around the world, where we see the appropriation of Christianity for political purposes, either to shore up the regime, the country, the state, or indeed to shore up one's own political party. And I would counsel all Christians to be deeply suspicious of those who seek to appropriate the gospel for political purposes. China has been mentioned as well, a country where on the face of it Christianity is tolerated, but where those branches of the church, the house churches, those that are faithful to Christ alone and will not bow the knee to the state, find themselves increasingly under serious threat. And it is just worth touching on a moment why it is that Christians are persecuted and why they are the most persecuted group on planet Earth. Not the only persecuted group, we should stand with all others as well. I meant what I said in my opening remarks. But Christians believe that we have ultimate allegiance somewhere else. So Jesus, famously in Matthew 22, is approached by someone who's trying to catch him out. Says, are you going to pay taxes to the temple? Are you going to pay taxes to Caesar? And a coin is given, or he picks up a coin, and he says, whose image is on this coin? And the image is of Caesar's. And Jesus famously says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, to God what is God's. That may or may not be an instruction to pay your taxes. What it definitely is about giving the image bearer or the image provider all of what that image entails. That coin has Caesar's image on it. You have God's image on it, on you. And so, yes, give the coin to Caesar. You give you, all of you, to God. You can see why that is deeply countercultural and offensive. I heard Ms Butler, Justin Welby being interviewed by Laura Koonsberg the other weekend, and many of you will have heard it also. And the most irritating part of the interview from my perspective was when Justin Welby did not push back when Laura Koonsberg said, why isn't the church more in tune with the culture? Because we're not meant to be. We are countercultural in every place and in every generation, and that will wind up dictators, and it will wind up so-called democrats also. And that is why I pay tribute to the Prime Minister for appointing my honourable friend, the member for North Northumberland, and recognising that freedom of religion and belief is something we will always have to fight for, because especially for Christians, as we live our countercultural lives, we will always be offensive, following one who went to the greatest of all offences and died on a cross for all of our sins.
Thank you. I think in order to fit everybody in, I'm going to have to put a 2-minute time limit on speeches. Lizzie Collins.
Thank you, Ms Butler, and it's a pleasure to serve today for the first time under your chairship. As I have 2 minutes, I'll be very brief. The persecution of Christians was brought to my attention by one of my constituents, a member of the Heysham Free Methodist Church. I was absolutely appalled to learn of the threat of violence from so-called social media influencers, so-called Hindu nationalist leaders, that people have been displaced, their homes and businesses destroyed. It's absolutely abhorrent, and I wish us to speak with one voice on this. I also wish to speak against the state enforcement of religion. The state enforcement of religion, or the toleration of persecution of religions by the state, is absolutely unacceptable. I want to call particular attention to the persecution of those who hold no faith, a reality that too often goes unrecognised. In 2022, the president of the Humanist Association of Nigeria, Mubarak Bala, was sentenced to 24 years in prison for a supposedly blasphemous Facebook post. We have blasphemy laws. As of January this year, we have blasphemy laws in 91 countries in the world, including Northern Ireland, in fact. Blasphemy laws lead to the sort of harassment and persecution that Mr Barlow suffered. The harassment and persecution of people of all faiths and none, and they should be ended. Mr Barlow will actually be coming to the all-party parliamentary humanist group on the 14th of May, and I would invite honourable members to come and join us there to hear more of this story. This debate shows us that people of faith and people of no faith can have a powerful connection. We can make common cause. No one should be persecuted for their faith or lack thereof. Religious freedom, freedom of thought, freedom of belief must be actively protected, and it's worth fighting for. Thank you.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you. But we live in a strange age beyond doubt. The guilt-fused self-loathing that poisons so many tiny bourgeois minds extends beyond the disowning of where we've come from, our shared history, to being insecure about who we are. Well, to deny the Judeo-Christian roots of Western civilization is to ignore the essence of the values by which, underpinning what we share, make us capable of judgments necessary to know what's right. And the widespread insecurity about our Christian heritage neuters the response by people who should know better to the persecution of Christians. The sponsor of this debate spoke about parliamentary questions. I asked one when 70 Christians were found beheaded in the Congo. The response I got was full of broadly drawn liberal platitudes about universality and multilateralism. It said that the government was saddened. Not outraged, not disgusted, not determined to do something, but saddened. Well, that quiet sadness is an acquiescence of people who, in G.K. Chesterton's words, exercise tolerance. He said that tolerance is the value of a man without convictions. Well, the truth is that throughout the world, Christians face discrimination, largely in the name of Islamicisation of parts of the world that used to be Christian. The Middle East is a classic example where the number of Christians has fallen sharply over my lifetime and where Christians continue to be persecuted. The birthplace of the Son of God, bear in mind. So, in an age which falsely divides people between victims and victors, too often people in the West see Christians as victors even where they're being persecuted. I simply ask the Minister this: will he prioritise this? Will he put on a statutory footing the role of the person designated to defend minority religions, and will he make sure the government's policy in respect of age and foreign affairs addresses the issue of the persecution of Christians worldwide?
Thank you. Carla Lockhart.
And can I thank the sponsor of the debate for bringing this to the floor today. Freedom of religion or belief is not a Western ideal. It is a universal human right enshrined in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Yet millions of our Christian brothers and sisters, especially women and girls, are denied this right every single day. For many of us in the UK, faith is a core part of our lives and our identity. However, too often government has policy treated faith as an optional extra. And for me, this debate is not about abstract policy, it's about people, men, women and children who suffer for nothing more than professing faith in Jesus Christ. I'm thankful every day for my ability to profess my Christian faith and to live in a society where we have civil and religious liberties. I'm thankful for those who have fought for those liberties. So today I want to focus my comments on how persecution disproportionately affects women and girls. These women face a double vulnerability: persecuted for their faith and gender, often suffering in silence and invisibility. I want to commend Open Doors for their fantastic work in Parliament and across the globe. If we think of gender-specific persecution, we only have to think of forced marriages, domestic violence, sexual violence, psychological abuse and isolation, abduction and disappearance. And many of the voices go unheard. And unfortunately, because of time, we're unable to hear those voices today. But we also want to think of Nigeria. In 2024 alone, more than 4,100 Christians were killed for their faith in Nigeria. Over 80% of all reported Christian deaths worldwide. Church leaders, worshippers and entire villages were kidnapped and killed for no reason other than their faith. So given the huge changes we have seen in international relations in the last few months, can the Minister assure me that for the freedom of religious belief remains a foreign policy priority for this government?
Thank you. Jim Allister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under you. The first Christian martyr, of course, was Stephen. And Stephen was martyred simply because of his loyalty to the head of the Christian Church, the Lord Jesus Christ. And he has been followed down the eons of time by millions of others who have been persecuted and indeed put to death for simple adherence to the basic Christian message of redemption through the sole mediation of Christ. There's nothing offensive in that, and yet it offends. And the offence which it causes has caused many to lose their lives. And that is a shocking indictment of the wider world. And today we take for granted all the freedoms and liberties we have. But a debate like this rightly causes us to reflect on those who, to exercise those freedoms, jeopardise their own life. We think of Iran, where there has been an increase in the imprisonment of Christians, 22 in 2023, and yet jumped to 96 in 2024, indicating the trend. We think of Afghanistan, where the Taliban's return and their extreme Sharia law has included many being executed simply for converting to Christianity. And that is a sobering reminder of the values that we have and should hold to and should never take for granted. I finish with the words from the Beatitudes of Christ. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Thank you. Last but not least, Sammy Wilson.
Madam Chairman. Jesus, of course, warned his disciples that in this world they would have tribulation. And many Christians across the world have experienced that tribulation in their own personal lives. Over 340 million Christians today are actively persecuted for their faith. And that ranges from everything from discrimination to imprisonment, torture and death. And I think many of us find it hard to contemplate and comprehend that someone making the choice to be a Christian know that in some countries that's what they're going to suffer. One of the most moving experiences I've had in this house was meeting a pastor from Nigeria who told me in the Open Doors event we had here that his church of 400 was now down to 22 members because most of them had been killed. And he was going back to be their pastor, to lead them, regardless of what the consequences were. I doubt if there's many of us in this room would have that kind of bravery. But that's the reality. And I think that as this Parliament, we have a duty, first of all, to keep highlighting the issues by the questions we ask, the debates we have. The government has power to do things through its trade policy, its aid policy and its asylum policy. I remember one of the bishops in Syria told me that the Christian church had been decimated in Syria. But even when refugees went to refugee camps, They were the first to be persecuted and discriminated against in the refugee camps. And I think our asylum policy has also got to bear in mind that there are groups like that who have fled persecution and who are still being persecuted, and they should have priority when it comes to asylum in this country. There's much we can do, and I hope that debates like this encourage the government to do it.
Thank you. I'd like to give the mover of the motion 2 minutes at the end, just to wind up. I call the Lib Dem spokesperson.
Thank you, Chair, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I would also like to thank the Honourable Member for Newport Western, Aylwin, for securing this debate, which is as important as it is timely. I am very pleased to be speaking in this today as we break for the Easter recess. The right to practice one faith freely without hindrance or discrimination is fundamental. Liberal Democrats have a proud history of liberal universalism. We believe that all people should be able to live lives free from fear, including fear of religious intolerance, that human rights are applicable everywhere, and that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which enshrines freedoms of thought, conscience, faith and religious practice, has the same resonance now as it did almost 80 years ago when it was enshrined. It is distressing, therefore, to see Christians across the world persecuted, and worse still, to know that for many the situation is deteriorating. Today, at least 380 million Christians live lives subject to high levels of persecution and discrimination, an increase of 12% compared to 2021. Moreover, the number of countries considered by Open Doors to be conducting extreme or very high levels of persecution against Christians had tripled in the last decade, from 23 nations to 60. It is no coincidence that these statistics rise in parallel to increasing levels of conflict and instability around the world. 4 of the top 5 nations where Open Doors judges that the most extreme persecution of Christians takes place, Somalia, Yemen, Libya and Sudan, have suffered particularly acute civil strife and are highly fragile. When nations collapse into violence, it is often minority groups, whether ethnic or religious, who suffer first and suffer most. In Sudan, the world's largest humanitarian catastrophe, where over 25 million people are in need of food support, it is home to more than 2 million Christians who have been swept up in the brutal conflict. Over 150 churches have been destroyed, some deliberately targeted, and there are accounts of Christian leaders who have been murdered. Of course, I'll give way.
But it's not the whole story, is it? Because the persecution of Christians predates much of that. For example, in the Middle East, the persecution was given licence by the Ottoman Empire exactly on the grounds I described. This was aggressive Islamism perpetuated by the Ottomans, leading to persecution of Christians, particularly in Palestine, Bethlehem and other similar places. So conflict matters, but it's not all that matters.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. In conflict, minorities are persecuted, and religious and ethnic minorities are persecuted. British investment through international development spending in peace building and deconfliction reduces the risk of religious intolerance, and I'm deeply concerned that, as with so many vital areas encompassed by official development assistance, British efforts to safeguard freedoms of religion and belief will suffer because of this government's decision to slash development spending to the lowest level this century. And previous aid cuts have fallen hard on programmes focused on these issues. When ODA was reduced from 0.7% of GNI to 0.5% in 2021, the Institute for Development Studies found that some programmes protecting freedom of religion in South Asia saw their budgets plunge by 50%. The burdens of this, as has been said, are borne most of all by women and girls, who disproportionately face the horrors of religious intolerance whenever it appears. As evidence given by the APPG to the International Development Committee in 2021 attests, religious intolerance often goes hand in hand with the repression of women and girls. We tend to see this most clearly when it results in girls losing access to education. This deprivation is most acute when applied to women from religious minorities, for whom belief acts, as in the words of the APPG, a further marginalising layer of identity. Freedom of belief and gender equality are both cherished objectives of this government's development policy, and yet cuts to aid spending will result in setbacks on both fronts. The I'm also disturbed by the growing trend of authoritarian states using the digital weapons at their disposal to control and repress minority religious populations, including Christians. We see this in China, a country home to almost 70 million Christians, the single largest Christian minority population anywhere in the world, which has taken to deploying surveillance cameras both inside and outside of houses of worship, capable of identifying believers. China also uses biometric data as a tool to monitor and therefore control faith groups. What is particularly concerning is the extent to which this repression and the potential for still greater repression has increased in tandem with technology, and I urge the government to monitor and look at this closely. Britain must play its role safeguarding religious minorities and Christian communities across the world. In the past, the UK has helped to play a convening role, bringing together governments, NGOs and civil society leaders, for instance, through the Declaration of Humanity, which opposes religious interpretations that are used to justify conflict-related sexual violence and other crimes. It is critical, as the UK makes the moral and strategic error to cut development spending, we do all we can to preserve our diplomatic capabilities. And I'm glad that the Prime Minister has appointed a special envoy for freedom of religion and belief, and I welcome the honourable member for Northumberland to his role. However, for this role to be maximally effective, it must have dedicated support from within the FCDO. So can the Minister share what resources within the FCDO are available to support the work of the envoy, the honourable member, and would he also be willing, in view of the darkening situation for Christians around the world, to reassess the government's decision not to legislate this term to set the envoy on a statutory footing? Persecution based on faith should have no place in today's world. The worsening global outlook for toleration is an indictment of increasing levels of violence, conflict and extremism, and an invitation to redouble our efforts through diplomacy and development to protect religious minorities, Christian and other. This is the worst time for the government to make such deep cuts to our international aid budget, which supports projects which protect religious minorities. I urge the government to row back on those plans and return to the challenge in these most deadly times to carry the beacon for human rights, including Christian rights, and to match today's rhetoric with action. Thank you.
Thank you. Opposition spokesperson, Andrew.
Good morning, Ms Butler. It's, as always, a pleasure to serve under your chair. And can I commend the honourable member for Newport West and Islwyn for raising this vital issue in the House today, as we approach the most holy period in the Christian calendar, to remind us of the appalling persecution that is taking place against Christians throughout the world. And I'm not going to mention every country, there's so many that have been mentioned today, but it highlights the fact that in today's world it's dangerous to be a Christian in parts of our planet. And we in this country must stand up against that kind of persecution and oppression. And I commend all members that have contributed to this wonderful debate today. But I'd like to particularly draw attention to some of the remarks from my right honourable friend, my member for South Holland, the Deepings. But also I think that was replicated by my honourable friend, the member for East Wiltshire. I look at the crown above the door. There's a cross on that crown, and that tells us that our constitution, our liberties and our freedoms and our British way of life is founded on those Christian values. And whichever political party we represent today, it is vital that we defend those traditions. And so, Ms Butler, we stand here today to discuss what I believe to be a deep moral urgency. This is not an abstract issue. It is about very real suffering of people, men, women and children who are targeted, attacked, imprisoned and even murdered simply for their faith. For centuries, Christians have faced oppression. At home, this persecution has taken new ways of expressing itself, but abroad, it's still very much the same. Murder, state-sanctioned discrimination and violent oppression. Today, around the world, Christians are being oppressed on a staggering scale. Firstly, Ms Butler, in light of the government's efforts to begin the removal of sanctions against Syria and its stated desire to work with the interim government of that country, it is imperative that we ask the Minister today, what assurances has the government received that this new approach to Syria will not come at the expense of religious minorities? How will progress be monitored? What can be done to ensure a codified constitution in Syria represents everybody equally, especially Christians? What discussions have the United Kingdom had with our partners in Washington and in Europe to ensure that any future settlement does not come at the expense of these vulnerable communities in Syria? And crucially, what steps is the government taking to support displaced Christian families and to ensure accountability for these reported atrocities that we've been hearing so much about? And on China, in recent months, we have observed what appears to be a growing alignment between the government of the United Kingdom and China, a country where religious oppression has become ever more brazen. The government have announced an audit on UK-China relations. So I ask the Minister, will Christian persecution be a key part of that audit? Have individual cases been raised at the highest levels? For example, the recent arrest of Bishop Xiao Zumin in China, who was detained for refusing to pay a fine related to a mass the government of China deemed illegal. How is the government ensuring that its diplomatic efforts with the People's Republic of China include pressing for greater protections for religious minorities and especially, of course, for Christians? And so, having read this year's Open Doors World Watch List report, which many honourable and right honourable members rightly highlighted today, I am sure I speak for all members across this House when I say that while we welcome its publication, its revelations are no less troubling than those of the previous year. So very little progress, sadly, seems to be being made. In South Asia, Christian communities continue to endure grave challenges and under increasing social pressures. In Pakistan, blasphemy laws continue to be disproportionately weaponised against Christians, with widespread reports of abductions, forced conversions and systematic discrimination in day-to-day life. In Bangladesh, rising hostility and subtle everyday forms of persecution, particularly in rural areas, have created an environment of fear and exclusion. So, I ask the Minister, what representations have the government made to these Commonwealth countries? How is British aid being used to safeguard religious minorities and promote genuine freedom of belief? What more can the Commonwealth of Nations as an organisation do to promote religious freedom? And will he use the government's influence to ensure the Commonwealth acts in areas that it can do across Commonwealth nations in this respect? Nigeria, as highlighted by many other members today, another Commonwealth nation, the situation grows more dire by the day. Christian villages are being attacked, churches burned to the ground, priests kidnapped and executed. Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa undermine the rights of anyone who does not subscribe to their extremist ideologies. And so, has the government sought assurances from the Nigerian government on protecting Christian communities, especially in vulnerable regions of that country? And what support is being given to enhance the security and resilience of these communities against such threats? Of course I will.
My friend, maybe as blunt as this. We have a lot of influence in Nigeria, so I would go as far as to say no trade, no aid until the government acts on this.
Well, my honourable friend makes an excellent point. We have to get tough with these countries that behave in this way, and we have to uphold the freedoms of these people. That's part of our heritage, and we should ensure that the rest of the world receives our support where minorities are being threatened and persecuted. And so I could go on with examples from countries ravaged by war to those where legislative oppression cloaks persecution in legality. We could all do so. But the suffering of Christians is global and unrelenting, and our response must be equally tireless and resolute. The last government introduced a position of the Prime Minister's envoy on freedom of religion and belief, Fiona Bruce, a wonderful person. We very much miss her. And I am, however, delighted that the current government has renewed that commitment in appointing the Honourable Member for Northumberland. But can the Minister outline what progress has been made since the Honourable Member's appointment? How is the envoy working across all departments and with international partners to protect Christians at risk? And will he enshrine the appointment as something that is a permanent part of the way we do things, so making it law, as Fiona Bruce attempted to do, so that we always have someone that fulfills that very important role? And what more can we do to support and amplify the Honourable Member's position so it delivers meaningful change? So let me be clear, Ms Butler, this is not a partisan issue. This is about standing up for the fundamental right to freedom of religion. It is about defending those who are suffering simply for their faith. We must not remain silent. And let me say this. Britain has a proud history of standing up for the religiously persecuted. We must remember that if we do not defend religious freedom abroad, we weaken it at home. A world in which Christians are persecuted with impunity is a world where faith is no longer safe. Our message today must be clear. We will not stand idly by. We will not allow the persecution of Christians to be ignored any longer. And so I end with the words from the Gospel of St. Matthew, a passage that feels all too relevant today. Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. You will be hated by all for my name's sake. Let those words remind us of our duty. The question is, what will His Majesty's government do about it to defend the freedom of religion, the rights of Christians, and to prevent and condemn and to stop persecution around the world? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Stephen Doughty.
Well, thank you, Ms Butler, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairpersonship today, and I think your first time in this role. And I'm particularly grateful to my honourable friend and neighbour, the member for Newport West and Isloin, for securing this debate and indeed highlighting many of the shocking examples of persecution of Christians around the world. And can I thank all of the honourable and right honourable members today for their contributions, especially the honourable member for Northumberland, our new UK Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion and Belief, and I welcome his appointment, commend his efforts and look forward to engaging with him over the months to come to discuss his work so far and what we as the government can do to support it. As Proverbs 31:8-9 reminds us, we must speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, and that's been very much the tone of many of the contributions today, representing the stories and the lived reality for many persecuted Christians around the world in many, many diverse and difficult and extremely dangerous and often life-threatening contexts. And I'm very glad that we've heard such passionate contributions today, despite the fact that they represent some extremely horrific situations. And I declare an interest, Ms Butler, in this debate as a Christian who has also worked with Open Doors and other related organisations in the past to highlight these cases. I'm very conscious, as a member for North Antrim, I think, reflecting on the example of Stephen of my own name. And indeed, the name of this place in Welsh is actually San Steffan, not Westminster. So that very much is something that reminds me when I walk into this place and walk in through the entrance. And I remember asking my mum as a young child why I was called Stephen and what was the story, and reading very much of that horrific persecution and death that he endured. I'm also privileged to represent a constituency in Cardiff South and Penarth rich in religious diversity and tolerance, including in its Christian communities, encompassing Catholic, Protestant, Greek Orthodox, Nigerian Pentecostal, every kind of church and chapel that very much it represents the diversity and wonder of my constituency, but also they sit alongside mosques and temples and gurdwaras and synagogues and those who have no belief. And that makes my community beautiful, it makes it rich. But sadly, that is not the experience in many, many parts of the world, as we've heard today. And the statistics bear repeating. 380 million Christians facing high levels of persecution and discrimination. That's 1 in 7 believers. Nearly 4,500 murdered for their faith last year. Over 2,000 forced into hiding or exile, each with their own terrible story to tell. And for many in parts of Africa, the Middle East, into South Asia and East Asia, persecution, harassment and discrimination is part of daily life. And of course, that is the reality for many people of many different beliefs and minority communities, but particularly, as we've heard today, for Christians. And in the course of my own duties and indeed my own personal life, I have met many courageous Christians who have suffered for their faith. Indeed, I reflect on the visit I undertook just a few weeks ago to Ukraine, where I met a priest in Bucha who had worn civilian clothes during the Russian invasion. After a fellow priest was killed, he showed me some absolutely brutal and shocking atrocities carried out by the Russians. He had to bury members of his own congregation. Indeed, he helped to dig their graves. And on a personal trip to Jerusalem just a few years ago, I visited St George's Cathedral, where I heard of the abuse that Christians face even in that holy city from extremists, including being spat on and persecuted. And many other examples of suffering have been raised today, and I will not be able to cover all of them, but I'll attempt to address some of the key points. Firstly, Ms Butler, let me just say that the UK remains strongly committed to freedom of religion or belief. No one should live in fear because of what they do or do not believe in. That is why we are championing freedom, tolerance and mutual respect through our work on the international stage, our bilateral work and our programme funding. And indeed, my honourable friend, the member for North Northumberland, has been busy with international engagements and outreach since his appointment. And alongside his efforts, we are using our extensive diplomatic network across the world and dedicated FCDO staff to champion freedom of religion or belief and indeed to challenge the persecution of Christians and other religious minorities. And again, I want to pay tribute to the work of organisations like Open Doors. That crucial World Watch list shines a light on Christian suffering around the world, and to the many brave human rights defenders drawing government attention to these vital issues at huge personal risk. I say that we stand with you. And members have referred to many of the recommendations in the report, and we welcome the report and its recommendations, which we're considering carefully. A number of members have raised the issue, the very difficult decision taken by the Prime Minister with conflicts overseas undermining our security and prosperity at home to cut our ODA budget from 0.5% to 0.3%. The Prime Minister and indeed myself on many occasions have been clear this is not an announcement that we were happy to make, but we of course will do everything we can to move towards rebuilding our capacity and our commitment, regardless, to freedom of religion or belief and to tackling persecution of Christians and other minorities will not waver. And I've noted the various points today made about specific countries and programmes, and of course the envoy has also heard those too. I would highlight, Ms Butler, the important work we do in our programme funding, including the John Bunyan Fund, which enables us to target funding through our posts and centrally to support our objectives on freedom of religion or belief. We also build awareness of relevant issues amongst our staff and our platforms through seminars and training. We hosted a seminar last summer for religious engagement for foreign policy. And of course, we mark and use the important international dates and campaigns such as Red Wednesday to reinforce our commitment to promoting and protecting freedom of religion or belief. We also continue, Ms Butler, to work at the international and multilateral level. This includes our work through the United Nations, where we regularly engage and participate in interactive dialogues with the Special Rapporteur. Last month, our Special Envoy was in Geneva to do this in a session on the intersection between freedom of religion and belief and torture. We participated in different dialogues in New York, and of course, we also co-sponsor side events at the Human Rights Council. and we regularly raise freedom of original belief during the Universal Periodic Review process, which has been mentioned on a number of times. And we specifically recently raised in November in statements on Bhutan, on Nicaragua, on Qatar, and in the case of Nicaragua, we noted our increasing alarm at the deteriorating human rights situation, including the closure of church-affiliated organisations and harassment and arbitrary detention of members of the church. I will give some other examples, Ms Butler, of the work that we've been doing, because this is very much at the heart of efforts the Foreign Secretary and other ministers have been engaged on. Last December, he wrote to Pastor Lorenzo Rosales Fallado, imprisoned in Cuba, to express his solidarity and calling for his release. We were delighted when he was released in January. Freedom of religion of belief is also crucial to our work in Pakistan. My honourable friend, the Minister Faulkner, visited in November to promote this work during meetings with government ministers, business and religious leaders. I want to turn in the last few moments to a number of the country contexts that have been raised, that members have raised. Many honourable and right honourable members raised the situation in Nigeria, and I wanted to reassure colleagues that we regularly raise freedom of religion or belief with the Nigerian government. Of course, the drivers of intercommunal violence are complex, and through our security and defence partnership, we engage with our key stakeholders to address these. We regularly raise freedom of religion or belief with the Nigerian government, including during their periodic review in January 2024, and we condemn all incidents of intercommunal violence. We raise concerns at the United Nations Security Council, and through our £38 million Strengthening Peace and Resilience programme, we are attempting to address the root causes of conflict in the Middle Belt and beyond, and that partnership builds the capacity of Nigeria's security forces to tackle violence against civilian communities, including those of different religious backgrounds and beliefs. Syria was raised by many colleagues. We have made absolutely clear that the government that is forming there must ensure the protection of all civilians, set out a clear path to transitional justice and make progress to an inclusive society, which must include the protection of diverse religious minorities and communities in Syria. And let me be clear, we will judge them by their actions. I'm also the Minister for Sanctions, and we're closely monitoring the situation there. China was, of course, mentioned by many. Let me be clear, the United Kingdom government stands firm on human rights in China, including the repression of minorities. We raise our concerns at the highest levels. The Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, Chancellor and Energy Secretary all raised human rights recently with their counterparts. In Iraq, our freedom of religion and belief specific objectives are absolutely threaded through the British Embassy's, Baghdad's and British Consulate General Erbil's programme work. In Algeria, the British Embassy in Algiers has raised freedom of religious belief with the Algerian authorities on a regular number of occasions, and he did so recently on the 10th of February. Our ambassador met the Minister of Religious Affairs, and we will continue to raise concerns, including in relation to Kabila and the operation of the Protestant Church of Algeria. On Libya, last year we co-sponsored a human rights resolution at the Human Rights Council relating to these issues. Of course, the Holy Land itself was regularly referenced. I, of course, referenced that in my own opening remarks. And, of course, respect for freedom of religion and belief and the promotion of interreligious dialogue play an absolutely important role in securing sustainable peace, and our Consulate General in Jerusalem regularly meets and discusses issues with the Christian community in the occupied Palestinian territories, including with the patriarchs and the heads of churches in Jerusalem. In relation to North Korea, we continue to press for DPRK to collaborate with the international community and take steps towards the implementation of the human rights obligations. Obviously, hugely concerning situation there, not only for Christians but for so many others, and Christians being categorised as a hostile class, according to the Special Rapporteur on DPRK. Eritrea was raised. We continually raise human rights concerns with the Eritrean government. Indeed, the UK Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea raised human rights during her visit to Eritrea in June last year, and we continue to work on this closely. Sudan was also mentioned. Obviously, an absolutely horrific situation in Sudan. That's why it's been so key in the Foreign Secretary's efforts and indeed our commitments on ODA and indeed our work at the United Nations Security Council. And of course, Iran also mentioned, and we're absolutely committed to holding Iran to account for its restrictions against freedom of religion or belief, including the UN Third Committee in October. In conclusion, Ms Butler, I just want to reiterate the government's absolute commitment on these issues, the importance of it both to me personally as a Minister and indeed to the Foreign Secretary. We'll continue to do important work with our Special Envoy and indeed organisations like Open Doors. I very much welcome the different examples that have been raised by Honourable and Right Honourable Members today. It is very important that these voices are heard, that these situations are exposed, and they can be absolutely assured of our commitment to work with them in tackling persecution against Christians and indeed all on the basis of their freedom, on the basis of their religion or their non-belief around this world. That's the right thing for this country to do, and we will continue to do it.
Minister Ruth Jones to wind up.
Thank you, Ms Butler, and it has been a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and I want to thank all honourable and right honourable members for attending today and giving such an informed and knowledgeable debate here. Hopefully we've highlighted the plight of persecuted Christians across the world, and I hope we've amplified their voices, that people here in the UK will wake up and realise just what is going on across the world today. I want to say thank you especially to the Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief for attending, and I look forward to following his work as he represents the UK on the world stage. It's also been good to hear from the Minister about what's been, he has been and his team have been doing, and I look forward to him continuing his work to promote religious freedom, especially for Christians across the world. And I would urge him, we need to make sure we're turning laudable words into concrete actions to protect and support our Christian brothers and sisters across the world. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the persecution of Christians. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.